In the past 15 months, Emerson has had no less than 4 Sunday services on race relations in the United States. 15 months ago, I gave a sermon on the new Jim Crow, and I spoke about the disturbingly high incarceration rates of young black men and the racist motivations behind that high incarceration rate. Last September, 3 members of Emerson, gave their personal and varied responses to the killing by police of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Last January 11th, Mrs. Deanne Bonner, chair of Cobb NAACP, spoke from our pulpit not only about what is happening nationally with the killing of young black men by police, but she also affirmed the need for change in Cobb County. On January 18th, just 10 weeks ago, I spoke about our laudatory Unitarian Universalist history in race relations in Atlanta, leading up to and including the Civil Rights Movement. And then I spoke about the equally laudatory role that Unitarian Universalists played from across the nation. In Selma, Alabama, in 1965, 177 clergy and seminarians responded to Martin Luther King's call to come to Selma. And in that sermon, I suggested there is still more work to be done. And so here we are again. Last Tuesday, a young black man, Nicholas Thomas, was killed by local police who were attempting to arrest him for a probation violation. This was only a few weeks after the fatal shooting of Anthony Hill in DeKalb County. Mr. Hill, a mentally ill black man and war veteran, completely naked and unarmed, was killed when he ran at DeKalb County police officers. Last Wednesday morning, I first received an email from a Cobb County activist and someone I consider a friend, who is an outspoken critic of the systems of injustice in our communities. The first thing that I noticed was that he used the word murder to describe the death of Nicholas Thomas in Smyrna. I bristled at his use of the word murder because I had many more questions than answers. As I read more of his email, there was a link to a WSB TV report that had 2 dramatically different accounts of what had happened. Police said officers feared for their lives when the suspect drove toward them in a white Maserati. But there was also a witness who reported the car was not moving when they began to shoot at him. In response to a direct question, the eyewitness said at no point was Thomas making any aggressive moves. On Wednesday evening, I went to the location where Nicholas Thomas died, and I joined with others in prayer, in reflection, and deep sadness at the loss of his life. Later that evening, I participated in a conference call, meaning I listened, as representatives of more than 20 local groups concerned about the death of young black men at the hands of police strategized about a response. I will tell you that I think this is a complex issue, which means I'm probably going to irritate most of you, if I've not already, at some point in my sermon. But I will try to be as transparent with you as I can. I believe that police officers are performing incredibly dangerous jobs, and I believe they have the right to defend themselves. But I am also concerned with the number of unarmed black men who are dying at the hands of police. I have questions about what seems to be a pattern of the excessive use of force. This past week, I mentioned the death of Nicholas Thomas to a ministerial colleague, He said that when he heard that a man had been shot dead in a car, he knew instinctively that the man was black. He didn't even have to ask. That shocked me, and I continue to struggle to understand what is happening. Let's back up a little. This newest chapter on race relations seems to me to have taken root after the death of Trayvon Martin just over 3 years ago. I was deeply troubled by Trayvon Martin's death for some very personal reasons. Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman because Zimmerman was suspicious of him and approached him probably in an aggressive way. Zimmerman was carrying a gun. An altercation ensued, and Trayvon Martin was killed. Martin, who was visiting in a predominantly white community, was described as wearing a hoodie, and he had gone to a convenience store to buy candy and a drink. When I say that I had a personal reaction to Trayvon Martin's case, here is why. As you may know, my son, 23 now, is African American, and he loves his hoodie. And as a teenager, my son would walk about freely in our predominantly white neighborhood. There is no doubt in my mind that George Zimmerman provoked the situation that led to the death of Trayvon Martin, and for me it is a travesty that Florida laws protected him under the guise of stand your ground laws, which, by the way, also exist in Georgia. While it was the legal system and not law enforcement specifically that protected Trayvon Martin's killer, I believe the case contributed to the continuing distrust between the black community and our legal system. Again, I tell you this story because I believe it's important background information to understand what is happening today. It was last summer that we learned of the deaths of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and Eric Garner in New York. Eric Garner, you may recall, uttered, "I can't breathe," and I did the research. He uttered that 11 times while being restricted by police. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office concluded that Garner died partly as a result of a police officer's chokehold applied for 15 seconds. Chokeholds are not legal in the New York Police Department, and the police union claims it didn't happen. It was these cases that seem to lead significantly or have led to significantly increased scrutiny in the deaths of unarmed black men by police officers. I'm not enough of a statistical whiz to claim that there is a clear pattern. I suspect someone is doing that research as we speak. But given the cases that I've mentioned this morning, I believe the increased scrutiny is justified. In my research, I did find the following report. Following the announcement that New York Police Department Officer Daniel Pantaleo, I think I'm saying that right, would not be indicted for killing Eric Garner, the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund Twitter posted a series of tweets. I read them, naming 76 unarmed people of color, men and women, who were killed in police custody since 1999. Is this list exhaustive? Is this in proportion, or is it out of proportion to the number of unarmed whites killed in police custody? Do these cases demonstrate the use of excessive force? These and others are questions I have. There are people smarter than I am who can speak more eloquently on these topics, but I have to wonder, what is the impact of blacks living in an oppressed state of existence for so long? Just 50 years ago, we denied blacks the right to vote, and we brutalized those who tried to peacefully organize for that right? Are we now living in a more sanitized version of racial bias and discrimination? Perhaps the chain gang no longer exists for blacks or whites, but does its brutality, both physically and emotionally, continue for blacks? You've heard me say it before, but it bears worth repeating. In Stafford County, Virginia, I lived there, I attended a court hearing, that there has been a clear bias of seeking the death penalty if the defendant is black and the victim is white. And if you're not moved by this one county in Virginia, the website for Georgians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty also shows a clear racial bias in the application of the death penalty in the state of Georgia. Or perhaps we need only look to the racist chants by a University of Oklahoma fraternity. According to recent national reports, and I found this by accident, these most recent reports, members of the Oklahoma chapter learned the chant on a leadership cruise sponsored by the national organization 4 years ago. It's all over the national news in the last 2 days. It may seem that I'm going too far afield, but I don't believe that I am. There is much to learn from the Justice Department report on the Ferguson Police Department published on March the 4th, 2015. I've not read the 102-page report, but let me read to you from the table of contents. Section 3, Ferguson law enforcement efforts focused on generating revenue. Section 4, Ferguson law enforcement practices violate the law and undermine community trust, especially among African Americans. Subsection titles describing police practices state, Ferguson Department of Police, FDP, engages in a pattern of unconstitutional stops and arrests in violation of the Fourth Amendment. FDP engages in a pattern of First Amendment violations. FDP engages in a pattern of excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment. Section 4B speaks to court practices that impose substantial and unnecessary barriers to the challenge or resolution of municipal court violations and unduly harsh penalties for mispayments or appearances. Section 4D is titled, Ferguson law enforcement practices erode community trust, especially among Ferguson's African American residents, and make policing less effective, more difficult, and less safe. Could any of this happen in Cobb County? You may know that the Cobb County Chief Magistrate abruptly resigned in January. 2 lawyers who had made complaints against him claimed he had a pattern of speaking abusively, particularly to women and minorities, asking personal questions and making insulting remarks about their heritage, their marital status, and their children. So what are we to make of these reports of unarmed black men dying at the hands of police officers, not only around the nation but in Atlanta as well? Are we satisfied that police are simply doing their duty? Are we to blame these deaths on the heightened bravado of young black men who are making bad choices? Are we right to ask for increased scrutiny of our police forces? I'm not comfortable jumping to conclusions, and yet I believe we have a moral responsibility to ask the hard questions, fully recognizing the difficult job of a police officer, but also recognizing that police officers have options at their disposal. And ultimately, we must ask if excessive force has been used when the suspect is a young black man, And if found to be true, we must ask why. I'll be the first to admit that these problems are complex. This is why I bristle when my activist friend refers to the death of Nicholas Thomas as murder less than 24 hours after his tragic death. One thing, though, is clear to me. It is that we need to mourn the death of a young man in our community. This is why I invite you to attend the vigil that is set for Tuesday, March the 31st at 7 p.m. at the Smyrna City Hall on King Street. And late last night, I learned that on Monday, March 30th, that's tomorrow, at 1:30 p.m., the family and attorneys of Nicholas Thomas will meet with the chief of police of the Smyrna Police Department at the City of Smyrna City Hall. The family and their attorneys will provide a statement to the media after their meeting. I will tell you now, whether it is at the Monday press conference or at the Tuesday vigil, you will hear anger. You will hear accusation. You may hear things that make you feel uncomfortable. But do not let that keep you away. Attend and be the voice of calm that also demands answers and accountability. Attend and be the voice that speaks with conviction and with love in your heart. For me, this is the essence of my faith, to speak both with conviction and passion, and to always speak from a place of love. May it be so.